The conference room on the 47th floor of the Grand View Hotel hummed with the subdued energy of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany tables where Chicago's business elite gathered for the annual Commerce Summit. Among them sat Richard Hartwell, a real estate magnate whose developments had reshaped the city's skyline, his silver hair and tailored suit radiating the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. Another champagne, Mr. Hartwell. A server approached with practiced deference. Richard waved him away dismissively, his attention fixed on his phone. Around him, executives traded stories of acquisitions and market victories, but Richard felt above such pedestrian conversation. He'd built an empire from a single property investment 30 years ago, and now commanded more wealth than most of these men would see in 10 lifetimes. A commotion near the service entrance caught his attention. A young black woman in a simple grey uniform, clearly hotel staff, was speaking urgently in German to someone on her phone, her voice carrying across the room with surprising clarity. J.A.I.C.H. Verstehe. Die Unterlagen müssen bis Montag fertig sein. Keine Sorge, ICH wird alles überprüfen. Richard's eyebrows rose. He prided himself on his linguistic abilities, having learned German during his years expanding into European markets. The young woman's accent was impeccable, not the stumbling phrases of a casual learner, but the fluid mastery of someone truly fluent. As she ended her call, Richard found himself standing and approaching her, driven by curiosity and something else, a vague memory stirring in the back of his mind. "Excuse me," he said, his tone more abrupt than intended. "You speak German?" The young woman turned, surprise flickering across her delicate features. She couldn't have been more than 25, with intelligent brown eyes and natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag read, Maya Johnson, Housekeeping. "Yes, sir. I apologize if I disturbed you. I was on my break. Where did you learn it?" Richard interrupted, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Maya hesitated, clearly caught off guard. I studied linguistics at Northwestern, sir. German, French, and Mandarin. But if you need something for your room, Northwestern. Richard's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. "And you're working as a maid?" The word hung in the air like an insult. Maya's spine straightened, and something flashed in her eyes, not anger, but a weary dignity that suggested she'd heard this kind of skepticism before. "I'm working to pay off my student loans, sir. The job market for linguists isn't exactly booming. Now, if you'll excuse me, wait." Richard's voice softened slightly, that nagging memory growing stronger. "Your mother, does she work here too?" Maya's expression shuttered immediately, becoming carefully neutral. "My mother is the head of housekeeping, yes." "Why?" Richard's mind raced back 20 years. A young black woman, pregnant, cleaning his first major office building downtown. He'd been reviewing blueprints late one night when he'd found her in his office, carefully dusting around his papers. They'd struck up an unlikely conversation. She'd been studying at community college, taking night classes while working 2 jobs. He'd been impressed by her determination, her sharp mind. In a rare moment of generosity, he'd offered to fund a scholarship for her child's education when the time came, and then life had moved on. His company had grown, that building had been sold, and he'd forgotten all about the promise to a cleaning woman whose name he couldn't even remember. "What's your mother's name?" he asked quietly. "Diane Johnson." "But I don't see what, Diane." The name triggered a cascade of memories. The promise. The scholarship he'd never followed through on. His assistant at the time had reminded him once or twice, but it had seemed so insignificant compared to million-dollar deals and corporate mergers. Eventually, everyone had simply forgotten. Richard felt an uncomfortable twist in his chest, not quite guilt, but something adjacent to it. This brilliant young woman, speaking multiple languages while cleaning hotel rooms, could have had a very different life if he'd kept his word. "I need to speak with your mother," he said abruptly. "Can you arrange that?" Maya's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why? Is there a problem with the housekeeping service?" "No, Richard struggled to find words, unused to explaining himself. "I knew her, years ago. I'd like to speak with her. My mother is very busy, Mr. Hartwell. If you have concerns about the hotel service, I'm sure the manager, this isn't about the hotel." Richard's frustration bubbled over. Several nearby businessmen turned to look. He lowered his voice. "Please. Just tell her Richard Hartwell would like 5 minutes of her time. She'll understand." Maya studied him for a long moment, her intelligent gaze seeming to look right through his expensive suit to something deeper. Finally, she nodded curtly. "I'll ask her. But my mother doesn't owe you anything, Mr. Hartwell. Whatever history you think you have, it doesn't give you the right to interrupt her workday." With that quiet rebuke, she turned and walked away, leaving Richard standing alone in the middle of the conference room, feeling oddly small despite his billion-dollar net worth. Diane Johnson arrived 30 minutes later, and Richard recognized her immediately despite the passage of 2 decades. Her hair was grey now, pulled back in the same practical style her daughter wore, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence he remembered. "Mr. Hartwell." Her voice was professionally cool. "Maya said you wanted to speak with me." They stood in a quiet corner of the hotel's lower level, away from the conference attendees. Richard suddenly felt absurdly nervous, like a student called before a principal. "Diane." "Yes. Do you remember me?" "I remember," she said simply. No elaboration, no emotion. Just those 2 words. "The scholarship," Richard began, then faltered. "I promised you a scholarship for your daughter. For her education." 23 years ago, Diane confirmed. "I was 7 months pregnant, working 3 jobs. You found me reorganizing your filing system one night. I'd noticed it was inefficient, costing you time when you searched for documents. You told me I was smart. That my baby deserved opportunities you could provide." Richard winced at the precision of her memory. "I meant to follow through. Things got busy, the company expanded, you forgot." Diane's voice wasn't accusatory, just matter-of-fact. "It's fine, Mr. Hartwell. We managed. But your daughter, Maya, she's brilliant. I heard her speaking German like a native. She went to Northwestern. She could be what?" For the first time, emotion crept into Diane's voice. "Working in some corporate office, making you feel better about a promise you broke. My daughter graduated summa cum laude with a degree in linguistics. She speaks 5 languages fluently. She's writing her master's thesis on language preservation in indigenous communities while working here to pay off her loans. She's exactly who she's supposed to be. But she's cleaning hotel rooms. So am I." Diane's eyes flashed. "Is there something wrong with that? I've been head of housekeeping at this hotel for 12 years. I manage 30 employees. I put myself through community college while raising Maya alone. I taught her that honest work has dignity, that you earn respect through character, not job titles." Richard felt his face flush. "I didn't mean, I know what you meant." Diane's voice softened slightly. "Mr. Hartwell, you want to know why I never contacted you again? Why I never reminded you of that promise?" He nodded, unable to speak. "Because I realized something that night after we talked. I realized that men like you make promises to people like me because it makes you feel good about yourself. It's charity, not investment. You saw a poor, pregnant black woman and felt magnanimous. But you never actually cared what happened to us. We were just a good deed to tell yourself about. That's not fair, isn't it?" Diane met his eyes steadily. "If you'd really cared, you would have followed through. Instead, you forgot we existed until you happened to hear my daughter speaking German at your conference. Now what? You want to swoop in 20 years late and play savior. Ease your conscience with a check." Richard stood silent, her words cutting deeper than any business rival's attacks ever had. Because she was right. He had forgotten. Completely and utterly forgotten 2 human beings whose lives he'd touched, however briefly. "What can I do?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing," Diane said simply. "We don't need you, Mr. Hartwell. We never did. What Maya needs, she's getting through her own hard work and determination. What I need, I've already built for myself." She paused, her expression softening just slightly. "But if you really want to do something useful with your guilt, there's a program at the Northwestern Community College, tutoring for first-generation students, many of them parents working full-time like I was. They need funding. Not scholarships with your name on them, just quiet financial support so more people can get the education they're working for." Richard nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside him. "I'll make sure they are funded. Properly funded." "Good." Diane turned to leave, then paused. "Mr. Hartwell. That night 23 years ago, when you found me organizing your files. You told me I was too smart to be just a cleaning lady. I want you to understand something. I was never just anything. Neither is my daughter. The work we do doesn't define our worth. Our character does." She walked away, her posture straight and proud, leaving Richard alone with the uncomfortable weight of his own assumptions. The conference continued, but Richard found himself unable to focus on the presentations about market trends and investment opportunities. His mind kept returning to Diane's words, to the quiet dignity with which she'd exposed his casual cruelty, the cruelty of forgetting, of reducing human beings to background characters in his own story of success. That evening, as attendees gathered for the gala dinner, Richard noticed Maya again. She was part of the service staff, efficiently managing the beverage station with the same competence her mother brought to her work. He watched her laugh with a co-worker, saw the way she carried herself with confidence despite the uniform that made her invisible to most of the wealthy people in the room. He thought about his own children, his son who'd taken over the company's European division, his daughter who ran a successful architectural firm. He'd paid for their educations without thinking, sent them to the best schools, opened doors with his connections. It had never occurred to him that this was anything other than what fathers did. But what about the fathers who couldn't do that? The mothers who worked 3 jobs like Diane had. Their children were no less deserving, no less brilliant. They simply lacked access to the casual privileges Richard took for granted. On impulse, Richard pulled out his phone and called his attorney. "Frank, I need you to set up something for me. An endowment fund for continuing education, community colleges, certification programs, that sort of thing. Focus on working parents. I want it administered by Northwestern's community college program, anonymous donor. Start with 10 million, and I want it structured to sustain indefinitely." He could hear the surprise in Frank's voice. 10 million. Richard, that's generous, but maybe we should discuss the tax implications. I don't care about the tax implications. Just do it. And Frank. No press releases. No naming rights. This doesn't get attached to my name or my company. After he hung up, Richard felt something unfamiliar, a sense of peace that had nothing to do with closing a deal or beating a competitor. He'd spent decades building monuments to his own success. Maybe it was time to build something for people who would never know his name. 3 days later, Richard was checking out of the Grand View when he saw Maya at the front desk, apparently covering for someone on break. Their eyes met, and he saw a flicker of recognition. "Mr. Hartwell. I hope your stay was satisfactory." "It was enlightening," he said honestly. Then, feeling awkward but compelled to speak, "Your mother is an impressive woman. And you, I'm sorry for what I said about your work. It was disrespectful." Maya's expression softened slightly. "Mom told me about your conversation. About the old promise." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I used to be angry about that, you know. When I was younger and watching Mom work herself to exhaustion. I'd think about that scholarship that never came, about how much easier things could have been." "I'm sorry," Richard said again, the inadequate words all he had. "But then I got older," Maya continued, "and I realized something. If you'd kept that promise, if you'd paid for everything, I would have spent my life feeling like I owed you. Like my success was yours to claim. Instead, every degree I earned, every language I learned, every achievement, it's mine. I did it. My mom and I, we did it together. Nobody can take that away from us." Richard felt his throat tighten. "You're a lot wiser than I was at your age. Than I am now, probably." Maya smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. "Well, I had a good teacher. My mom always said that how you treat people when you don't have to be kind, that's what shows your real character." She handed him his receipt. "I think maybe you're learning that lesson a little late, but better late than never, right?" As Richard walked toward the exit, wheeling his luggage behind him, he turned back for one last look. Maya was helping an elderly couple with their checkout, her patience and kindness evident in every gesture. Diane appeared briefly, consulting with her about something, their heads bent together in easy collaboration, 2 brilliant women who'd built their lives on their own terms, who'd found dignity in work that people like him dismissed without thought. He'd come to Chicago thinking himself a titan of industry, a self-made success story. He left understanding that real success had nothing to do with the size of your bank account. It was measured in kept promises, in seeing the humanity in everyone you met, in recognizing that the person cleaning your office or serving your drink might be every bit as remarkable as anyone in the boardroom. The scholarship he'd promised Diane all those years ago would have cost him a fraction of what he'd spent on his last vacation. But his failure to keep that promise had cost something far more valuable. It had revealed the casual cruelty of a man who'd measured human worth by social position, who'd forgotten that everyone's dreams matter equally. Richard climbed into his car, but instead of heading to the airport, he pulled out his phone and called Frank again. "The education fund we discussed. Double it. And I want you to research other programs, job training, childcare for working parents, whatever they need. I have a lot of making up to do, Frank. Let's get started." As he drove through Chicago's streets, past office buildings and hotels where thousands of people like Diane and Maya worked in invisible jobs, Richard made himself a new promise. This one, he would keep, not because it made him feel good about himself, but because it was the right thing to do. And if he was finally learning that lesson at 65 years old, better late than never, the real education, Richard realized, doesn't always come from universities or business schools. Sometimes it comes from a woman in a grey uniform who speaks 5 languages, and has the grace to tell a billionaire that his money can't buy back his conscience, but his actions, going forward, might at least point him toward redemption.